Welcome to the Tesseract podcast, where we unlock your power to innovate. Our mission is to empower airmen, connect them to resources, and accelerate change across the Air Force logistics enterprise. Specifically, our team works as an innovation accelerator assigned to the Air Staff Logistics Directorate, where we partner with airmen to operationalize the new sustainment strategy. My name is James, and I'm going to be your host today. Good afternoon, Technical Sergeant Dan Kosty. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to finally be here.
Dan is a Tesseract core member. He works in the concepts integration side, so that's kind of the team that I work on as well. So Dan and I work together a lot. Dan, could you give yourself a quick introduction? You know, where are you in the Air Force? Where'd you come from? How'd you get here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tech Sergeant Dan Kosty, been in the Air Force just over 8 years now. I'm a C-17 crew chief by trade. Spent my entire crew chief career at Hickam. Kind of split that between working the flight line, working at CTK, and then flying a little bit as a non-C-coded, non-official FCC, but yeah, still flying a mission. And then, yeah, I had the opportunity while I was out there to start a software organization called Tron. So I have some experience there in the software realm. And then worked extensively with the Loha Spark out there, the local Spark cell at Hickam. And just joined the team here at Tesseract about 8 months ago. Just keeping the ball rolling.
Heck yeah. What were those early days like at Tron? And what was what was the intention of crystallizing this effort as a software factory? Because I know that you were working on one project.
Yeah, so Tron was a beast. But it was also, we had a lot of autonomy provided to us by Colonel Burke at the time, the wing commander. So it all kicked off with just some conversations from the major that was running the Spark cell at the time, and then Erob, who was the wing exec at the time, and he said, "Hey, you should you should get after this software thing because the Air Force doesn't do it very well." Funny enough, Erob said no a lot, many times. And then he finally came around on, funny enough, a mission to North Korea when we were going to pick up some remains from the Korean War. And so Erob finally came around and saw the value. And so he came back and started recruiting people. I mentioned I was interested in design, kind of had a background in design, not so much UI UX design, but the more 3D modeling, CAD kind of stuff. I spent a lot of years building robots in high school and competing in the first robotics competition. So I understood design, but maybe not in the practical sense that we were talking in software. And so I applied, said that I was interested. We did a whole interview process. Got the email that said I didn't get selected. So that was cool. And then they called me. I was on mids. They called me at about 11 in the morning, sound asleep. And my squadron commander called me and said, "Hey, they want you to go with them to try and start this thing. You got to tell me yes or no. You're going to be gone for 6 months TDY." For context, I got married 3 months prior to that. So trying to figure out the new whole marital living, and just woke my wife up also and told her, "Hey, I'm probably leaving for 6 months." We figured it out. She said, "Go do it. It's something you got to do." And so I leapt and went for it. And I mean, it's history since. Like you said, we primarily worked on one project, right? And so that was Huckboard. Originally started out as a Marine Corps contract, working with DIU. And then transformed into an Air Force project. We had the opportunity to go through a Red Hat product residency, which was working directly with Red Hat engineers, designers, product managers.
Red Hat being
an open source software company. And so this was kind of the first product residency they'd done in the DoD. So it was kind of trial and error for them. Trial and error for us. We were still trying to figure out what software was in the DoD and how this organic capability was going to kind of come about. We went to San Diego, started working with Red Hat, jumped right in it. We continued the Marine Corps project, working at Miramar Air Station, and with MV-22s and CH-53s and FA-18s, all airframes that I was not very familiar with, but grew pretty familiar with pretty quickly. And then we left there. We worked puckboard there in Colorado for a while, or in San Diego for a while, and then we had the opportunity to go work with Platform One and Space Camp as all that was kind of standing up. And so we went out to Colorado, spent about 45 days there, just working hand in hand with their product teams and kind of seeing how they were doing software, bouncing ideas off of one another. Nobody really knew. Nobody really had a codified process of what they were doing, right? And so we were kind of just all figuring it out together. And we left there with an MVP of puckboard that we brought back to the 535th Airlift Squadron at Hickam, which is a C-17 squadron in the 15th Wing. And they were our primary test bed for transitioning from the Marine Corps over to the Air Force, to the C-17 platform. And we spent about the following year just working extensively with them, doing constant design iterations and testing, and just making sure we were developing a product called puckboard to meet the user's need and the mission's need.
That was the Wild West of software development. That you bounced around between these different software factories, and you're kind of each looking for where you plug in. And obviously with Tron, you had the kind of one big project. I wish that I could have been kind of a fly on the wall for some of those encounters. I'm sure that was really cool. And at the time, you were a senior airman. Is that correct?
I was.
So, real quick, when they put the applications out for kind of joining this team, do you know who those went out to? Is the entire Hickam, the entire base?
It was the 15th Wing.
Oh, 15th
Hickam.
Wing. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And do you know what kind of made you stand out? Obviously not enough because you got rejected before being accepted. Just kidding. But
we just like we do here at Tesseract. When I got there to Tron, we had the opportunity to kind of see all of our feedback and the notes that were taken during our interview process, so we could both understand why we got the job, but also learn from whatever was pointed out that maybe you wouldn't get the job for. And so I guess I stood out with the ability to accept feedback, critical feedback, which was not something that a lot of people do well. And so during the interview process, they gave us a challenge where we had to design an application on the fly to schedule coworkers to play ping pong in the office, right? So they had a whiteboard and they said, all right, design me a homepage, go, all right, cool, here's some feedback from the user. And it was all stuff that you would never get, right, unless you really didn't scope out a problem properly, which obviously I didn't scope out the problem properly, but we just got a lot of really critical feedback and had to make changes. And so, I think that was the primary driver there in this selection.
That's awesome. So I think that you transitioning from the Miramar Marine Corps airframes and their kind of mission set to the C-17 probably had close parallels to what you did in your job interview there, which was you didn't know, you didn't have maybe you didn't scope out the problem set fully, right? You had to go there and learn, ironically, on the airframe that you worked on prior to that you had a lot of experience with. Could you speak to how you guys approached the C-17 problem set and kind of created a path forward that had user experience and kind of the end product, but also your own capabilities and what you were coming from in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I mentioned, being a C-17 crew chief, I have a lot of experience with the airframe and working with the air crews, both loadmasters and pilots, in different circumstances, both flying and on the flight line. And so working also with E-Rob, who was a C-17 pilot at the time, we knew a lot about the C-17, but also what we learned in the 6 months prior was that your personal bias can't get in the way, right? And so we took everything we knew about the way C-17 operations operate, happen, and threw it away. We wiped our slates blank, and we walked in there like it was our first day in a airlift unit, right? And we just asked questions that maybe we thought we knew the answers to, but we wanted people to tell us. We wanted the users that were going to use the application, that worked the jobs in and out every day, to tell us what they needed and what struggles they were facing, and how we could best tackle those problems. It's not an easy thing to do. We constantly had to check ourselves, both me and Irab, to make sure that we weren't bringing our bias into the realm of the team. But that's getting rid of your bias is probably the key ingredient there.
Any specific examples of you having to confront a specific bias that you had as it interfaced with app design?
Yeah, it was a little bit more difficult, I think, for me to make my biases, get rid of my bias, but at the same time make it correlate to what was going on, right? Because I was coming at this problem from an unbiased perspective, but also from a maintainer's perspective. And so in my head, we work hours and hours to make that plane ready to go. And every time a pilot steps on that plane, it's because they are in dire need of training or they're running a mission, right? And that wasn't always the case, come to find out, but we kind of worked through that problem set for vanilla locals and things like that, if you're familiar with the airlift operations sector. But coming at scheduling aircraft and missions, it's all in the airlift world focused on people and their qualifications, right? And so kind of like what a section chief does in a maintenance unit is getting people to work, making sure that they have the right qualifications, that they're up to date on everything, and that you are scheduling the correctly qualified people together to accomplish a mission. There's a lot that goes into that, and making sure that you put the right people in the right positions to both operate the mission, conduct the mission, but also grow as an airman and as a pilot, just be put in the position to work together with that team in a way that develops everybody and doesn't just focus on one thing or one person or just complete the mission.
Sure. The broader goals that we all have in common, that sometimes you can get lost in the weeds when you're in the day-to-day. So you brought up a comparison between kind of the ops focus and you said much like a flight chief, there's this kind of issue of getting the right people in the right places. I think that would point me, as I'm trying to understand what you're talking about, in the direction of saying, well, the transition from the Marine airframes to the C-17, they're fundamentally the same thing then, right? So what were some kind of hiccups or maybe some assumptions that you had made incorrectly about how they are, air quotes, the same thing, and the transition would be easy?
Yeah. The biggest difference between the operations that happen at Miramar and the operations that happen at Hickam is heavies are running their mission every day. We have a certain amount of jets at Hickam. Some are on missions, some are in maintenance, scheduled maintenance, and some are set aside for locals for training. And so those couple aircraft that are on the mission, that's our operational mission. Wartime efforts, supplying things downrange, or humanitarian aid around the Pacific, depending on what's going on. And so at Miramar, working with helicopters and fighters, they were in a solely training mode, right? And so if they are not deployed on a carrier or downrange, they're in training. And they are training specifically in a cycle for an upcoming deployment. And at that time in 2019, we were still operating pretty heavily in the Middle East. And so they were all on track for a deployment that was coming up. And so that was something coming into it. I said, airplanes are airplanes, right? They have wings or they have, propellers or engines or whatever. They're all machines that fly and they all operate the same in a unit, right? But it just didn't cross my mind that just the big difference between the way heavies and fighters and helicopters operate. It was pretty eye-opening.
Sure. Yeah, it depends on, I have kind of programming experience personally, so I have like 1,000 metaphors going through my head about inputs and outputs and stuff like that. But when you talk about kind of the changing the scope, and you are talking about ultimately changing the output of what your greater goal is, right? When you're talking about deployments versus like a daily mobility kind of mission set. So it's both easy but also hard to conceptualize how the actual concrete differences look in the day-to-day. But thank you for clarifying on that. I would invite listeners, if they want to hear more about the kind of complexity of transitioning software, to listen to the episode with Major Kyle Gouge McAlpin, who is the kind of interim project manager at the DAF MIT AI Accelerator for Puckboard before eRob actually went and joined the organization. But also my interview with Colonel Barry Flack, the episode before this, about what it means to kind of consolidate different interests into a bigger mission, like a bigger mission and bigger goals for all the different kind of disparate units that form a piece of this landscape. After you left Tron, could you talk about what you did then, and what was the difference when you were going back versus when you joined Tron?
Yeah, absolutely. So, quick recap on kind of my career up to Tron was I spent 1.5 years on the flight line working C-17s at Hickam with the Hawaii Air National Guard. We have a TFI unit there. The Iron is owned by
Total Force
Integration. Okay. The Iron is owned. C-17s are owned by Active Duty, but we work TFI there. And then on the flip side of the AMU, the F-22s are owned by the Guard, but we also work TFI there. And so that was a really good opportunity to get the experience to work with people that have worked that aircraft for 10, 15 years, right? And they're doing that mission every day, and they know the ins and outs, and they know the faults and the circuit breakers and everything by heart. And so, and they care about what they do a lot. And so getting the opportunity to work with a lot of those guys was, I don't know if I would have gotten as far as I did, as quickly as I did as a maintainer, if I weren't working with them. So I really appreciate that opportunity to have been there and done that. I had I was given BTZ, so I got Senior Airman below the zone, and I immediately went to CTK. Me being an A1C, just about to put on my 3rd stripe, right? I said, why am I being punished? You give me a 3rd stripe and you're going to send me to CTK. This doesn't make any sense.
CTK, the support section for issuing out tools and stuff, in case you're unfamiliar.
Exactly, yeah, good point. And so we, historically in the maintenance world, in some places, CTK was kind of viewed as the place you send the people that aren't performing on the flight line. And that's what people think. Well, then I went back there and I learned that that's not the case, right? CTKs, the sortie support is what keeps a maintenance unit running. And so I had the opportunity there to be a program lead on dozens of programs behind the counter. Learning.
Just an example?
Yeah. Hazmat, coordinating the ordering and disposal of hazardous materials from the supply section. So we have them in our satellite access point, and so we can distribute them for maintenance actions such as sealant and grease and things like that. And then taking back the used products and properly disposing of them. That's.
So this is something kind of unique to CTK, and Dan here is very. He's got a great spirit for kind of rolling with the punches there, but. You refer to being the program lead for dozens of these things, and then the example is Hazmat, where you're in charge of kind of multiple aspects of this big, like, legal, policy, praxis construct, right? And you're given agency to run it, right?
Yeah.
So to Dan's point there, the perspective for a lot of folks that's a punishment, but you kind of get in that seat and you realize that you actually have a lot of agency, whereas maybe you didn't have the same kinds of kind of room for your own initiative in other places. Great example, but go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one example. I worked managing equipment in the CTK, and in the equipment world, everything's serialized, everything's tracked, and it's reported up to the MAGCOM, right, and then eventually to the program office. And so there was just so much that goes on behind the curtain that you don't know, right? When you walk up to that counter and you say, I need things to go do a basic post-flight, right, or something. I'm going to go do something on the flight line. You say, I need tools, and people give you tools, and that's what you think CTK is. But I had the opportunity that was probably my first real opportunity to make changes that I thought would better, help the mission. And I had some leaders back there that gave me the opportunity to make those changes and kind of give me some autonomy to do things and fail and learn from it and move forward. And things like rearranging our entire hangar, right? Been back there a couple months and was just kind of handed the keys to the kingdom to go rearrange millions of dollars worth of equipment because I thought it would work better in a certain configuration. And it didn't the first try, and it did the second try. And so there's a good example of learning from the mistakes. But so going back to the original question, I went into CTK as a senior airman. I left CTK after a year and a half as a senior airman as a staff select, and I went to Tron as a staff select. Was TDY for about 6 months, came back, immediately went to ALS, which TDY for a software development startup in the Air Force, it was civilian clothes all the time, right? It was not the typical military because we're working with civilian organizations, and we also don't want to bring our Air Force uniform into a Marine Corps squadron because that just adds bias to the conversation that we don't want to present, right? And so we usually don't even tell our users that we're active duty until after the interview because it just breeds truer feedback when we don't. And so I came back, I went directly to ALS, got re-blued, as they say. ALS was a really cool experience. We had some hardship leading into it, and so it really rallied around some folks in our squadron when we returned and worked through all that. And then I left ALS, worked as a staff for about 8 months on Tron, and then returned to the flight line. I was given the option or the opportunity to cross-train as all that was developing. There were opportunities where I could have, either PCS'd or worked remote or things like that for other software organizations in the Air Force. That was all kind of blooming and bustling at the time, and so the opportunities were plenty if you wanted them and had the connections. But I realized that what I had learned from that experience could be applied to the flight line, right? And could be brought back to the mission and applied in a different way. And so I opted to go back to maintenance, which was a rude awakening. I left as a senior airman, right? I hadn't been on the flight line since I was like barely a senior airman, still kind of an A1C, and I returned as an NCO.
Yeah, CTK also famous for getting you out near the 8-hour mark.
Yeah.
Like that's the reputation because you kind of have a set schedule of work and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Which maybe being an NCO on the flight line does not have that same reputation without being too incriminating.
Yeah, definitely. And that was all going on during COVID. COVID just kicked off, right? And so I was working from home as a UI UX designer. I don't know how many hours I worked because the hours all blended together, right? We were at home all day, couldn't leave the house in military housing, and so we were just grinding. Started up Mattermost at that time and was doing customer service for DoD Mattermost and getting accounts set up and things like that. And so, returning to the flight line as an NCO, I was expected to know how to lead airmen.
And do your job.
And do my job.
Don't forget, it's been, 20 months or something like that?
Yeah, it's been almost 3 years now. Since I've really hands-on touched the C-17. And so... because of CTK before. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I didn't have the... I had the initiative, though, when I had returned to Hawaii while I was still on Tron. We didn't start work until 8:30 at Tron, and so I would go into maintenance at 5 when the shift started, and so I could get my 7 level as an NCO before I went back full time, because I knew that it was going to be a lot to take on, right? To know how to lead people, to relearn my job, and do it effectively. And so I returned to the flight line, and as things go, I started right back out on mids. And so mids is night shift. It starts at about 10 p.m. and goes till 5 a.m. in theory on paper. It's
Air
usually
quotes there.
yeah 6 or 7 once you're done with your paperwork and things like that.
Yeah, you turn your stuff in at 7.
Exactly.
Clear your number by 8.
Yeah. Maybe you're asleep by noon. To do it all over again the next day. And so I grew a healthy coffee addiction there now. But going back right on mids in at Hickam, at least in C-17 world is where the prime, like the majority of the work gets done, right? And so you're flying day locals, you're flying night locals, and then those jets return right at the end of swing shift or right on the beginning of your shift. So when you're recovering jets and you're doing all the inspections and then doing bulk repairs like tire changes and brake changes and things like that.
So what is done on swing shifts for a lot of other units conventionally
is done on nights at Hickam.
Yep.
And we also operate in different hour structures just due to traffic on the island, and that kind of fluctuates a little bit. But I got back and had some other NCOs kind of take me under their wing, guys that I had known before I left that knew what I was about before I left and were willing to give me a hand and get me back up to speed, along with the Hawaii Air National Guard folks, the technicians that were working, and they told me, made it very comfortable, right? They told me whatever I needed to get back up to speed, they were here for it, and they were going to help me through it. And so I'd say I got back in June, and by right at the beginning of September, I took an FCC mission by myself. So within 3 months, I was fully qualified to do everything I needed to do on the jet, and was flying missions as a lone FCC. And so that, but man, is it a different world. It is a different world.
Did you feel accomplished, like you blended in for that first FCC mission? Like you landed and interfaced with some people and they were like, oh, this guy's just salt of the earth, crew chief, knows his stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, leave a salt trail behind me. Yeah, I felt like I blended back in.
That's good.
Yeah. We, that mission was a pretty interesting one. I can recap it very shortly. We had the opportunity to take 3 Hickam aircraft and meet 3 Charleston aircraft up at J-Bear, Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson up in Anchorage, Alaska. And we were going to work with the Army to do some airdrops, some troop drops. And so we were going to operate a 6-ship, so 6 C-17s in formation, flying over an airfield up in northern Alaska and dropping some troops for training, right? But also operating in a formation flight. And that's training for the pilots. It's training for us to kind of temporary deploy to these locations, and the jumpers get jumps in. It's cold in Alaska in September, and it was distinctly cold that year, and so we had some hydraulic problems with the aircraft, right? 6 jets, 2 of them were down because we came out and they had problems, right? Faults or things like that. And that was rare instances on that jet, but so 2 were down, so we had 4 C-17s left. They go to start an engine on my jet, and there's a hydraulic filter that's bad. Turns out whoever packed our parts kit packed the wrong filter as well to replace it. So I had 2 of the wrong filter and none of the right filter. We spent about an hour. They had none in supply. We spent about an hour tracking them down there at J-Bear, and one of the they have a TFI unit there as well, our guard unit, and one of them had their hydraulics troops had one on hand in their their shop stock there, and so we got very close to canceling that entire mission because if we got down to 3 jets, we weren't going to fly it. And so there was my first mission thrown right back to the fire, right, and it was all on me to find this part and figure out how I was going to teach 2 brand new airmen there on the flight line how to change this part also on the engine, and then. But we got it, and we worked with the pilots pretty well. I was not engine run qualified at the time, so we had some engine run qualified personnel come out and run the engines, and everything worked out. So that was a prideful moment to come back to maintenance and kind of really get the opportunity to make the mission happen.
That's awesome. It strikes me, and I have no exposure to the world of flying crew chiefs, but it strikes me that you'd have a lot of opportunities to see the bigger picture of maintenance. And your example, kind of landing or simulating deployment and getting somewhere, and then realizing that you're going to have to interface with all sorts of organizations across the entire base to try to track down this part, and that they all have different ways of doing business. Sometimes they have different information systems and just different folks. So you have to kind of sleuth out where that part is, and glad it worked out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then how long were you back on the line before you applied to a position at Tesseract here?
Yeah, so I quit innovation cold turkey, you could say.
Did you get the shakes?
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard to say. So I knew that going back to maintenance and learning all that, right, I couldn't do both at the same time. And so I had to focus on maintenance. And then there was also an influx of brand new airmen at our unit there in the 15th. And so training was a priority. And I took that on and decided that I couldn't do both. And so for about a year and a half, didn't talk much with the innovation community. DoD Mattermost was kind of the place to chat about innovation at the time. I hadn't logged in over a year at the time. And so had to reset my account and everything, which was weird because I was a sysadmin when I left, and then had to find somebody to do all the things I knew how to do. And then, after that year and a half, I just walked into the Spark cell. And that's kind of the beauty of having a Spark cell on base, right? Aloha Spark is an office located next to public affairs. It was the public affairs closet at one point, back when it all got kind of kicked off. And so that place has whiteboards now and machines, and is all spec'd out to be a Spark cell. And so I walked in, and there was a captain in there who was a C-130 pilot, flying C-37s there at Hickam, and he was just welcomed me back in with open arms, and was like, "What do you want to work on? What are you interested in?" And I made it very clear, like, "Hey, there's a lot going on. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to put in, but I'm here to help how you need it. And these are kind of the things we're getting after in maintenance, and we're looking to make sure that we're collaborating with the Spark cell and the wing, and we're all kind of on the same page." And so I worked with the Spark cell there for about a year and a half, pretty in-depthly, on projects that Tesseract had their hands on or were managing at the time. So Arc Water, if you're not familiar, it's atmospheric water harvesting, and then a solar fabric that goes on tents, and so it generates both electricity and potable drinking water from the atmosphere. And so we working on stuff like that, and then the things like the M1 safety mechanism, and 3D printing those, and getting certified printers and things like that. And so not only was I working alongside Tesseract on some of their initiatives, but don't tell QA, but I had I would have earbuds in on the flight line on mids at night, doing be out there with the flashlight doing a BPO, right?
We do not condone this. Tesseract does not condone this.
Yeah, I wouldn't do this. It's definitely a safety hazard. Most of the time, to be honest, I had one earbud in, right, and then one out, just so I had situational awareness. But it's kind of full circle here, because I was listening to this podcast on the flight line, just learning about the initiatives that were going on, things at the time that had to deal a lot with supply, and that I had no real window into, and so I was just, once I got a taste of it, I couldn't get enough. Started reading doctrine, and really diving into AFIs and understanding how we operate, and then I applied to Tesseract. I worked with the team, submitted my application. I actually missed a submission window because I spent a long time on my application, but I wrote the whole application in the driver's seat of an Expediter van, on my GTAC, in between waiting for the jets to launch and things like that. And so it's kind of cool looking back that I had the opportunity to apply for this job while I was doing my other job, and that kind of make it all tie together. But I same as Tron though, I got an email that said I didn't get the job. And so this is a trend with me, where I apply to something and if I get an email that says I didn't make it,
You made it.
I made it. Yeah. So then I think about
There's like
3
some
months
kind of
after.
quantum joke about that, about observing a state, but not the place for that.
Yeah, Schrodinger's acceptance.
Yeah. I would like to do something I've never done on the show, and I would say I'm going to push back on something you said.
Okay.
Because I'd like to revisit it.
Yeah.
And that was, you mentioned that when you got back to the line, you decided to quit innovation because you couldn't do both, right? But to be clear, I'm going to posit something and you can agree or disagree. What you were talking about is you couldn't do both because you were a new supervisor in a demanding job on a demanding shift, and when you had previously interacted with innovation, you were doing it full time, and you knew that you could not keep one foot in that very full time, very consuming thing. Is that a correct assessment of your thoughts and feelings at the time?
Yeah. I knew I couldn't give it what I wanted to give it, and so I didn't give it. I didn't want to not give it enough, and so I didn't give it any.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure when we go out into the field as the Tesseract team and talk to airmen about ideas, the expectation is very often that so ideas come from you doing your job, right? So that's the greatest source, and the truest and best ideas come from you doing your job and then realizing there's a better way to do it, right? So there's that part of pursuing innovation is often in tandem with the work, and the kind of unfortunate truth is that, especially in the earliest iteration, is it's usually done in addition to your normal duties because you still have to do your job, right? That's the first and foremost thing. Yeah. I just wanted to kind of make that clear when Dan mentioned that he couldn't do both. That's a kind of personal judgment call, and it has to do with bigger life interests too, like, still being not newlywed at the time, but that was kind of you're still early in getting used to living with each other because you had spent time abroad or spent time TDY and stuff like that, and then you suddenly have a new job where you're working mids, so it's like really hard to kind of balance the home life thing.
Yeah. If I can touch on that a little bit, that's a really good point. These innovators out there in the field, it's 99% of the time not their full-time job, right? They're working, and this was me when I was in the maintenance unit when I finally came back into innovation and started working with the spark cell again. If you get a free moment at work, you're working on a project, right, in the innovation realm, or you're working on something in the unit that's innovative, things like that. But it very quickly turns an 8-hour on paper, work day, especially in maintenance, that turns into 10 or 12. It very quickly turns that into 14 or 16, and that's not an easy thing. And so there's a lot of conversations about it, and I don't know what that looks like, but innovation is something that we need, right? If we need to accelerate change, or we're going to lose. And so if we're not innovating, we're done for, right? And that's kind of how that looks. And so giving people the time to work these projects and making sure that you're operating a unit efficiently enough so you're not wasting people's time, so they have the opportunity to think about this stuff and go out and get involved in their local spark cell. That's key, because it very quickly can get overwhelming, and just it turns into something that doesn't actually create anything. So.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in one episode. Don't have the reference off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But kind of a message for leaders, but also, just kind of capital A airmen across the board is, there's no blanket solution for creating a space for folks that you supervise or folks that you interact with. There's no blanket solution for creating a space where the good-spirited innovators that are genuinely trying to improve their own lot, their fellow airmen's lot, and the lot of the overall the mission. There's no kind of blanket solution for harnessing those powers, right? It's all kind of like personality-based. To Dan's point, if you can operate such that you are efficient enough that you have excess time, like that's kind of the gold standard, and then you allow people to use that excess time that maybe they're still in the workshop to kind of pursue side projects. And that's not the only way that could look like. That could actually look like kind of slicing some time out of their day and actually giving them some support, and then maybe doing some checkups or just connecting them with resources, or there's no easy way to do it. But I think that kind of segues very nicely, Dan, into talking about what you currently do on the Tesseract team.
Yeah, so I am a program manager here at Tesseract on the concept integrations team. And so we are really focused on airman innovation, as you probably know because you're listening to this podcast. And so we, like James said, airmen in the field doing their jobs are the ones that are coming up with these solutions, right? But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of know-how to turn that into something that's real and something that provides value, not only to themselves or their unit, but to the force, right? To the ecosystem. And so we day to day, I'm working with airmen around the Air Force in different A4 communities, understanding their job, understanding the solutions that they've created for problem sets, and then helping work through the wickets. This is might get me in trouble, but I say this all the time. We kind of try to grab people by the hand and pull them through bureaucracy that is the DoD. There's dozens of steps to get from A to Z, right? More than the 24 that are actually in between there. And so we try to help them navigate that and connect them to resources and connect them to other offices in the Air Force that can help them, that may be working on a similar effort, and they can combine forces and get after it together. And so it's probably it's a very difficult job. But it's one of the most rewarding positions I've ever filled in my life, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Do you have any specialties or superpowers that you developed or brought onto the team?
Oh, goodness.
Well, here, maybe I'll help you out.
All right.
If anyone has a question, and this is for field level people only, staff folks, you can't take me up on this because you'll beat me in my own game here. But if you have any questions about, for example, the technical order management, policy situation, praxis situation, I'm the guy on the team that people point to, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any similar specialties or anything?
Yeah. Being a maintainer, I connect really well with maintenance, right? But also my previous experience in the robotics field and building, I guess you could say world class. We competed at like the international championships a couple times, right? And so building robots to that capability taught me a lot and really lets me resonate with the mechanical, the more hands-on physical side of innovation. And so I think I maybe excel in that arena, but also just the communication, being a UI/UX designer and being able to walk into a conversation with an open mind and a lack of bias, and walk into supply and not be a typical maintainer that says, where are my parts? And you're the problem, right? Like everybody's trying to facing very similar problems. And so just walking into a room and really understanding people's, their day-to-day burdens and what they're going through, I think probably is a good superpower.
That is a good superpower, and you can carry that with you anywhere you go. Yeah. Do you have any idea what's next, right? You still have some time on the team here. You're kind of on the newer generation of folks like myself. But, talk me through your bigger picture plans for the Air Force.
Yeah. To be honest, I kind of let the wind take me a little bit, right? I joined the Air Force to be a crew chief, and being an FCC was the epitome of being a crew chief on heavies. And so that's what I was going to do. Then I got the opportunity to join Tron and start that whole effort, and kind of my perspective changed in the Air Force, and I got more opportunities than I'd ever know what to do with, and got to dive right into things. And so I'd never thought I would have those opportunities at the time, and so and then when I went back to maintenance, I knew either I would stay a maintainer or things would turn into something else. I'm going to be in the Air Force for 20 years at a minimum, right? I love what I do. I love being in this organization and the people that I work with day in and day out, and our mission. And so I know I'll be here. I know I'll wear a uniform that says United States Air Force on my chest. But where in that world I'll live, only time will tell.
I normally close asking about what's your favorite part of the Air Force, but I think you just laid it out for me there.
Yeah, I think so. There is one thing I want to close with, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead.
There's something that I try to tell as many airmen as I can, and I was a perpetrator of this when I was in the field, right? There's a lot of problems that we face day in and day out, and a lot of times we write them off as big Air Force problems. That's big Air Force's thing, or I couldn't change, I couldn't affect that because that's a big Air Force thing. I said it all the time, and I'm here to tell you that it's not true, right? Every person that wears a uniform that says United States Air Force or doesn't, our civilian counterparts, has the capability to make effective change and make this place better and make us a more efficient warfighting capability, or humanitarian aid capability, or whatever your mission is where you're working, right? You have the power and have the capability to make difference, and so don't let this mystique big Air Force picture stand in your way. Just if there's nobody around you that can help you through that, reach out to one of us because we're here for you.
It will not be easy, but it is not impossible. Go for it. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tesseract podcast. This show is how I started to learn about enterprise-level strategy and the innovation ecosystem within the Air Force, and I hope we passed along some learning to you with this episode. If you'd like to engage with our team, make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and connect with us on LinkedIn. Any references to trademarked, copyrighted, or protected products or services such as books, movies, or businesses are used here for the limited purpose of education and professional development of Air Force Airmen. If you have any questions, please contact us at www.tesseract.af.mil.